Hello, hello. Hi, gang. Here comes your Tuesday poll question. It's a Debbie Downer of a poll question. I tell you in advance. Patients without a terminal illness have the right to die? Do patients without a terminal illness have the right to die? First, thanks to my friends at Parks Casino, New York, Philadelphia, Detroit baseball. You've got pro golf, you've got pro hoops, you've got the hockey playoff. Everything is so exciting at this time of year. You can live bet it all, wager and watch. Live betting it's better on the BetParks app in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, and on the Play Gun Lake app in Michigan. You can bet individual player performances in baseball, like player hits and home runs, strikeouts, RBIs, points, rebounds, and more on pro hoops. Lots of action to choose from, whether your favorite team wins or loses. There's always a way for you to win on the BetParks and Play Gun Lake apps. The only apps that I ever use and recommend to bet on sports and to play all my favorite casino games right in the palm of my hand. You can also play blackjack, craps, roulette, poker, hot online slots. They have them all. 88 Fortunes, Cleopatra, Cash Eruption. Right now, get in on all that action. New users, there's a $1,000 casino bonus back if you're down in the first 24 hours. That bonus has to be wagered. Okay, so go to betparks.com or playgunlake.com. Download the app right now. Enjoy all the action and excitement from the casino in your fingertips. You've got to be 21 and in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Maryland for the BetParks app, 21 and in Michigan for the Play Gun Lake app. You love to play, you play to win, you bet. So BetParks and bet on the Play Gun Lake app. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. You have to take a look at the Monday and Sunday poll results from Smerconish.com combined. The Monday poll result, 35,261 voted. Should there be legal consequences for those who hire day laborers outside Home Depot without verifying their immigration status? 61.75% said no, 38.25% said yes. So keep that number in mind. I'll round it slightly upward. 40%-ish say there ought to be consequences for those who go to a Home Depot, see day laborers gathered out front, engage them, hire them for a job back at home. 40% say there ought to be some type of legal ramification. On Sunday, I asked a different question. Should ICE surveil day laborers congregating at Home Depot in search of work? 76.07% said no, 23.93% said yes. So where 40% in the Monday poll said there ought to be some culpability for the person who goes and does the hiring, on Sunday, roughly only 25% by comparison thought that, yes, there ought to be some surveillance of day laborers at Home Depot. What's the point, Michael? The point is, according to the back-to-back poll surveys, we are looking more harshly at those who do the hiring than we are the day laborers themselves by about 15 percentage points. I find that really interesting in light of all that is taking place in Los Angeles. I have lots of thoughts on that, and we'll share them on radio today. Back to the Debbie Downer of a poll question. Should patients without a terminal illness have the right to die? Just today in the New York Times, a story by Grace Ashford about Governor Hochul in New York. This is not apples to apples what I'm asking in the poll question, but it's entirely relevant. The New York State Senate approved a bill just yesterday that would allow people facing terminal diagnoses to end their lives on their own terms, which the bill's proponents say would grant a measure of autonomy to New Yorkers in their final days. Further along in the story, 11 states and the District of Columbia have passed laws permitting so-called medical aid in dying. The practice is also available in several European countries and in Canada, which recently broadened its criteria to extend the option to people with incurable chronic illnesses and disabilities. The bill in New York is written more narrowly and would apply only to people who have incurable and irreversible illnesses. That's not what I'm getting to with the poll question today. What I'm getting to with the poll question today, relative to Canada largely, is the issue of, do patients without a terminal illness have the right to die? In other words, is suffering enough? If a person is suffering, well, whether it's from mental illness, whether it's from physical disability, is the suffering alone enough as a requirement that they ought to be able to have autonomy, make decisions for themselves? Yesterday, I had a great conversation on air with Dr. Arthur Kaplan. Art Kaplan is kind of an old friend of the program. He had been a bioethicist at Penn. Now he's a bioethicist at NYU Langone, and a really, really bright guy. And he was here to flesh out the conversation as to what exactly is going on in Canada. I didn't know before I had read in on this that Canada is the number one provider of assisted dying in the world. If you would ask me, I would have said, somewhere in Scandinavia, maybe Belgium. I'm not sure. But Katie Engelhart wrote for the New York Times a lengthy piece talking about exactly what's going on in Canada. And she told the story of a woman named Paula, a Canadian woman who worked for months to get approval under what's called Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying program, or MAID program. And a lot of the story, which I have in my hand, is all about Paula's suffering from abuse as a child that manifested in the form of depression and anxiety. In middle adulthood, she suffered a head injury that resulted in long-lasting chronic pain symptoms. Her symptoms included muscle spasms, weaknesses, extreme vertigo, nausea, constant body aches, and migraines, and insomnia. But she doesn't have a terminal illness, but she wants to check out. And I won't give away it's a sad ending, but I won't give away the full story about her case, other than to say it's that which this whole story and analysis was built around. There's a difference in Canada between what they regard as the MAID 1 and the MAID 2 tracks. Track 1 was designed for elderly people with terminal conditions. That's like what New York is now seeking to do. But Track 2 was made for people like Paula, who were either young or had no terminal illness, who may naturally live for years or decades to come with their chronic pain and their illnesses. So while a Track 1 patient could technically apply and receive MAID within a day, that designation which allows them to take their life with assistance, the process for Track 2 is slower. There's got to be at least 90 days from the start of the assessment to the patient's death. Each patient is assessed by 2 independent clinicians, and if neither of the assessing clinicians had expertise with the patient's medical condition, they then had to consult with the clinician who did. So in the case of Paula, it meant going from doctor to doctor to doctor, repeatedly seeking to get approval. And eventually she was able to get that approval. In the piece that was written for the New York Times, I thought what really brought this home were the examples that they gave beyond this one instance. So, for example, listen to this and tell me, or you'll be answering when you answer the poll question today, whether you think this person has a right to die. An Alberta man in his mid-30s who'd been having multiple seizures a day since he was a child, and said he was tired of living in the drugged out half sedation that his medication induced. Or a 39-year-old Nova Scotia woman with a progressive spinal condition that caused relentless pain. There are other cases that are less obvious. Clinicians debated what to do with patients who wanted assisted death for conditions that affected large numbers of people, many of whom have been coping just fine. Diabetes, back pain, blindness. Not going to take your life, but if you're suffering and you want out, should that be enough? And then they go into different specific examples. Listen to this one. Dr. Donna Stewart, a psychiatrist at Toronto General Hospital, told the author of the Times piece, told me recently about a patient in his late 20s who took magic mushrooms, thought he could fly, found out that he couldn't, and sadly crushed and broke his neck and ended up a quadriplegic. Almost immediately, he applied for this MAID, is the acronym, in Canada. The doctor consulted with rehabilitation experts, and boy, I really got an earful, she said. Um, Rick Martins, a retired electrical contractor in St. George, Ontario, was 67 when he lost almost all the vision in his left eye. It went over the course of a few days, the peripheral vision first, then the rest. He was told that he had giant cell arteritis. At the time, Martin's wife was sick with congenital heart disease and was in the hospital. Martins visited her for 169 days. When she died in 2024, he found himself overwhelmed with grief, and then he lost vision in the other eye. That day, he decided he wanted the MAID program. It was too much all at once. He was approved several months later. In the meantime, he had tried to adjust to things. He got an audio player so that he could listen to books, continued to have coffee with a grieving widow he met at a support group, allowed his 2 adult sons to care for him, but ultimately decided that at nearly 70, he did not want to live as a blind man. During his assessment, a psychiatrist asked him whether he would still want to die if his wife were alive. Probably not, he said. If she were alive, he would find a way to live. But she was not alive. I mean, they're all such tragic stories. And so yesterday, Dr. Kaplan was on the program. He, arguably the nation's foremost bioethicist. And we talked about, the Canadian situation. And we talked about the fact that in 10 or 11 countries around the globe, there is assistance permitted for the terminally ill. The usual requirement is they've got to take the medication themselves. They've got to go through a waiting period. They need to make the request themselves. Often it's a cancer case. And he said something else that was really interesting, that usually about a third of the times that it's authorized and you're given permission, the person doesn't do it. But they want to have that option in case they get to a point where they wish to. The conflict that I have in answering the poll question today is that I'm an advocate for parity of treatment between those who are afflicted with a brain health problem and those who are afflicted with a physical ailment. I always say, when it comes to employment, when it comes to education opportunity, when it comes to just providing someone with grace, we need to get to a point as a society, and I don't think we're there yet, where we regard the appendicitis the same as we regard the depression. So I've thought a lot about this issue, and I kind of find myself conflicted, because if that's what I believe, then why am I so hesitant to regard suffering alone as justification? Because there's something that's holding me back in this. If you have a terminal illness, I'm all for what now is going to apparently reach Kathy Hochul's desk in New York. Someone who's in pain, they have a terminal illness, they're at the end of life, and they want to go out on their terms. I'm okay with that. I mean, it doesn't please me, but I'm okay with that. But if you say to me, well, it's the case of the guy who took the magic mushrooms, he's a quad, my heart breaks for him. Should he be able to make that decision? And then what happened yesterday on the radio program is that we went to the phones, and the calls were unbelievable. There was Tammy from Minnesota who called and essentially said, I'm poor and I'm depressed. And she was overwhelmed at the prospect of Donald Trump being the president, because I asked her, hey, 5 months ago, Joe Biden was in office. Would you still be wanting to check out? And she painted the picture of her family and social dynamic. It was very upsetting. And I felt like I did a poor job in trying to give her hope. I'm not sure anything I could have said would have given her hope. And then another caller called after Tammy hung up and said that she wanted to help her financially. And then there was another woman who called. This was really a an interesting telephone call. There was a woman who called who said that she'd lost her daughter. Her daughter had taken her own life with a gunshot to the head. And she was calling to say, and her daughter had suffered from mental illness. And she was calling to say that she wished she could have been with her at the end. And that maybe if this option existed for the non-terminally ill, her daughter would be gone, but would not have passed with such a gruesome ending. and could have been in the comfort of her mother and loved ones. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a real Debbie Downer of a poll question, but I think it's a really important poll question. The arguments in favor: patient autonomy, relief of suffering. Advocates of aid argue that relief of suffering through lethal ingestion is humane and compassionate. There are other arguments that are on the side of patient safety is another. Doctors can ensure death in a way that suicide by other means cannot. It can be a safe ending. The arguments against the system incentivizes the poorest and most marginalized people. They are the ones most likely to take the MAID route in Canada. Although I think the data shows that those who take their own lives generally, economically, are at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. So there was a quote from a person who is the minister in charge of Canada's disability inclusion who said, in some places in our country, it's easier to access MAID than it is to get a wheelchair. There's this whole argument, a disability discrimination argument. Listen to this, and then I'll let you go. The most organized critique of Canada's law, the Canada MAID law, the Canada law that allows for non-terminal a path to leave. The most organized critique of Canada's law came from disability rights advocates. In September of 2024, 2 people with disabilities and several nonprofit organizations announced a legal challenge to Bill C-7. Their case argues, this is interesting, that by definition, all Track 2 MAID patients, those are non-terminal illness, are disabled, people with medical conditions that limit daily functioning, and thus the law is discriminatory. If a non-disabled person is suffering and wants to die, her desire will be understood as pathological, and she will be offered suicide prevention. If a disabled person is suffering and wants to die, her doctor will hand her the proverbial gun. There's also another mitigating argument against this is the contagion argument that the number of lethal prescriptions will escalate if this door is opened when some see others that they know who are struggling, and it becomes a slippery slope. All right, that is oh my gosh, what a downer, Michael. What a downer. I know. The Tuesday poll question, we got to deal with it. Do patients without a terminal illness have the right to die? Go vote at Smerconish.com. Like and subscribe despite this dreary subject. Like and subscribe, and please set yourself up for notifications. Okay? Thank you, gang.